Good to have you with us, Yuka. You were starting with the EU. It's unveiled a new package of measures to shore up its metals industry.
Well, Sharon, just days after Donald Trump's 25% tariffs on imported steel and aluminium took effect, Brussels unveiled a raft of measures to protect its own metals industry, not just in response to the escalating trade war, but also to stave off a potential flood of cheap metals coming from Asia. Luke Traeger has more.
The European Union, there's no longer a choice. Its steel manufacturing is now a strategic sector that must be defended as part of its Steel and Metals Action Plan.
On the 1st of April, we will strengthen the current safeguard clause. We aim for a reduction of up to 15% in imports.
In the face of a 25% US tariff on steel and aluminium, Brussels has gone with quota restrictions. Anything above its new limit will be subject to a 25% levy. In last year's figures, the EU imported 60 million metric tons of steel, half of which was tariff-free. Another fear for Brussels is that steel from outside the EU destined for American factories may now divert to Europe as exporters seek to avoid US import duties, as the bloc tries to shore up its own metal sector, vital to rebuilding its domestic arms industries.
We saw in the past that cheap Russian gas, which was almost unlimited, has become rare, expensive, and we had to cut its supply in Europe from an international point of view. So let's avoid that tomorrow's steel is yesterday's gas. And that's why the strategy is fundamental for the EU.
Other moves Brussels has lined up will include tightening carbon transition rules over the origin and composition of non-EU steel, revising public procurement rules next year to favour European steel, and instituting a new programme to guarantee producers more stability in energy prices over the long term.
Well, US consumers, Yuka, they're increasingly worried that the threat of trade wars could raise substantially the cost of living.
Well, a recent survey showed their inflation expectations jumped to the highest level since late 2022. The US Federal Reserve also raised its projection, expecting prices to rise at an annualized rate of 2.7% this year, up from its previous estimate of 2.5%. Amid uncertainty over Donald Trump's trade and other policies, the central bank lowered its forecast for this year's US economic growth to 1.7% from an estimate of 2.1% back in December. It kept its interest rates unchanged at the current 4.25% to 4.5% range. Chairman Jerome Powell said at least part of a recent inflation uptick was related to tariffs.
The new administration is in the process of implementing significant policy changes in 4 distinct areas: trade, immigration, fiscal policy, and regulation. It is the net effect of these policy changes that will matter for the economy and for the path of monetary policy. While there have been recent developments in some of these areas, especially trade policy, uncertainty around the changes and their effects on the economic outlook is high.
While shares on Wall Street rose following the Fed's decision on interest rates, the S&P 500 gained 1% and the Nasdaq rose 1.4%, while the talk of elevated uncertainty from the Fed chairman pushed the price of safe haven asset gold further.
Next, artificial intelligence continues to advance in leaps and bounds. Yuka, industry leaders are speeding up to adapt to new demand.
Well, chip designer NVIDIA and Elon Musk's AI company xAI have joined a consortium backed by Microsoft, BlackRock and others to build more data centers and boost production capacity in the United States. Last year, NVIDIA raked in more than $130 billion in sales, much of that coming from its expensive data center chips. But those advanced processors and huge investments into data centers were called into question in January this year when Chinese startup DeepSeek claimed its AI model could emulate a human-like thought process almost as well as OpenAI's model at a fraction of the cost. Now, the sector's focus is now shifting from training AI models with vast amounts of data to what's called AI inference, a stage where they use their intelligence to reason like humans and generate adequate responses.
Finally, in business news, or we're hearing a...
Yeah, let's hear from the CEO of NVIDIA speaking earlier.
The ultimate scale-up. This is the most extreme scale-up the world has ever done. The amount of computation that's possible here, the memory bandwidth 570 terabytes per second. Everything in this machine is now in T's. Everything's a trillion.
Finally, in business news, UK ice cream maker Ben & Jerry's is suing its parent company.
Well, Ben & Jerry's has filed a lawsuit in New York against Unilever, accusing the global giant of firing its chief executive over his political activism. It's the latest in an escalating battle over the ice cream company's independence on social policy issues. Ben & Jerry's has long kept activism and progressive ideas at the heart of its corporate philosophy, saying it believes ice cream can change the world. According to court documents, the company alleges that CEO David Stever was, quote, removed from his position in early March after Unilever criticised him for pursuing Ben & Jerry's promotion of social goals. Tuesday's filing is part of the company's initial lawsuit filed last November, in which it alleged Unilever had silenced its attempts to publicly support Palestinian refugees. Last month, it accused its parent company of banning it from publicly criticising Donald Trump.